Other news, and this, I guess, sort of news, coming off of, I think it was last week, Cisco had their Cisco Live event, or maybe it was the week before, and there's a story in Forbes that was published, and the title of it is Jeetu Patel bringing Cisco investors a Satya Nadella moment. And so to me, there was two reasons I wanted to bring this article forward. First, there's a little bit of a personal connection. I actually, on a random day, met Jeetu Patel at the Ritz-Carlton in Dana Point, just on a social level. We happened to share a table. If you've ever been there, they have this amazing rooftop deck that overlooks the water, and it's sort of communal seating. Got seated next to him, got chatting, and turned out he was the Cisco executive at the. But at the time, he wasn't anyone had ever heard of. And so, but I really liked him. I was very impressed with him. And so I ended up sort of connecting with him on LinkedIn and following his career. And so it's sort of fun to see this almost meteoric rise over the last decade, as he sort of elevated into this position, is now talking. I mean, that's rarefied air to be talking about a Satya Nadella moment here, right? So, but I think it's also instructive from my standpoint because it speaks to, I think, a bit of a new era that we're entering, or maybe have entered. And that is that for a lot of the last decade, much of what separated companies that were winners and not tended to be really marketing and positioning and strategy around that. I mean, you look at Salesforce, right? I mean, maybe at the very beginning, Salesforce had a product innovation sort of led ethos, but most of their success has been that they've been absolute sales and marketing powerhouse. And I think you could say the same about a lot of the major players over the last decade. And what I think is interesting here is that the reason that Jeetu Patel is getting so much positive press here is because he is driving a bit of an innovation renaissance at Cisco as they attempt to adapt for this AI era. So whether you think it's hype or not, I do think it's just interesting. And I think you're seeing it actually with OpenAI, right? OpenAI is clearly a product innovation driven company, as well as I would say Microsoft has been doing very much a similar sort of motion here recently. And so I think it's this interesting era of, and certainly as someone who works at a software company, looking across this landscape, and, we all have so many cards we can play. Where are you focusing your energy? And I think it's a good sign. I mean, I think it's if you're a technologist anyway, I think it's exciting to see this period where product innovation is really leading the charge.
Yeah, it's not that every tech company has done this, but there does seem to be an advantage right now to have a CEO who has some sort of product background, like Satya Nadella. He was once upon a time a lowly product manager doing, I think it was a Microsoft Teams equivalent, unified communications demos back in the day, like 20 years ago. And now he's the CEO. And I think there's this need right now to figure out how to actually talk about the products and not just sell this broad vision that is so vague that nobody can figure out what's going on. The CEOs that are able to actually dig a little deeper into the operations, whether it be through product development and product management, such as Patel and Nadella, or the way that Tim Cook can dig so deeply into supply chain, it is an obvious advantage over those who really are more on the sales side, which I'm not going to name names there, not quite as complimentary, but we've seen a number of CEOs along those lines.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting, and I think it's, to be honest, harder, I will say. I mean, I think that to a large extent, one of the challenges with enterprise tech, if you look across many of the most established sectors, is they became very homogenized. It was very, very difficult to differentiate at a product level. And ironically, you talk about how you need more than this broad vision. One of the things that I've counseled in my analyst days, right, I've counseled countless organizations around, is that the vision was critical because it was the only thing you could actually differentiate on. It was the only thing you could sort of stick your claws into and say, okay, I understand their vision. They're going the same place I am. And now I think there is an opportunity, but the stakes are very high. I mean, it is expensive. Well, it's expensive to invest in product innovation, period. It's difficult to do, to find that niche that you're able to drive differentiation around. And it's incredibly risky if you get it wrong. And I think that's actually the challenge facing Cisco. I mean, Cisco is still a monster organization. Their technology still is, running the back end of massive amounts of the tech stack. But we tend not to be talking about them a whole lot anymore. And so, them trying to elevate that. In fact, that's some of the criticism here, that really what Cisco is doing is repackaging a lot of Nvidia stuff and yada yada yada. I mean, I think trying to reinvigorate that is challenging, and it's a risk. And I think that's true of any company. And if I put the CIO hat back on, it's, well, where do you then, how much do you weight that product innovation? How much value do you put on it in a space that for enterprise tech is relatively mature, right? I mean, how much value are you getting from it? Is it worth the risk? I think that's an interesting question that every CIO has to be thinking about right now.
Yeah, but at the same time, you've got the data center world is actually changing a lot because of AI. You have to figure out what your mix of chips are, and then how to get the network correctly, and then how to figure out your security strategy on top of that. And I think mixing that with this, call it trendiness of generative AI, and the executive wishes to be able to dig a little bit more deeply into operations with natural language, versus the reality of having to translate what is still an extremely technical and complex world to the executive office. That's probably going to end up being a Cisco challenge to try to figure out how much can we actually translate from a networking and data center and security perspective to the executive office before it gets to be too much. Because if it's not Cisco that does it, like, not many other companies are well positioned to both dig deeply into the tech and be able to get the CIO's attention.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be quite a challenge for them. I think in general, and I agree with you. I think, part of the reason that Cisco sort of landed where they were really isn't even their issue. It's that the reality is that there was very little change. When the enterprise tech stack workloads were fairly consistent, their data throughput was consistent. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of going on, right? And now AI has upended everything across the board, including at this level. So I think that will be interesting.